OK， 早上好。如果我不讲中文的话，好像我是丢面子了，因为这么多我的同事都会讲中文啊 ，Brenda、Joe 你都 put 我的 shame， 对吧 ？OK， 所以好像我们现在有一个新的规定，每一个上台的 presenter 需要讲中文，对吧？好。OK。Yeah， 对 ，including you, Rob Walls. Hey, welcome everyone to Shanghai. Hands up, is this your first visit to Shanghai? First time? Wow, that's a lot of people. So welcome to this amazing city. It's a great place. As you can see, you just go outside and sense the energy and everything that's happening. Who cares about payment security? Put your hand up if you care about payment security. Okay, if you haven't put your hand up, I'm not sure that you should be here. Because that's what we're here for today, is to spend a lot of time talking about payment security. And for the next 40 minutes, that's what I'm going to be spending a lot of time on. What are the trends happening in payment security? And also what Visa's strategies and approach is to ensuring that we continue to live and operate and work in a trusted environment in our industry. Joe's already covered off a lot of the important things we're going to be talking about, so let me get straight into it. Are you ready? Yes? Okay, excellent. We are at a very pivotal moment in our industry. There's no question about that. We've seen so much change over the past several years, from digital disruption to regulatory forces that are really pushing a lot of change in all of consumer behaviors in terms of not only how they pay or how we pay, but how we live. But one thing that hasn't changed is that security remains the top priority for everybody. And payment security is actually a shared responsibility between all of us. It's not up to Visa, it's not up to financial institutions, it's not up to merchants, it's up to everybody. It's in all of our interests to align on this totally important part of our industry, because without the trust in this industry, we don't have one. People just will not make payments. We must continue that commitment to businesses, to governments, and to our stakeholders. Now, last year, Visa actually had a really big birthday. Does anyone know how old we are? Anyone? 60. 60 years old. And a wise person once said, you actually have to know the past to understand the present and look into the future. And at Visa, we have a lot of history to look back on. And I want to look back on some key industry milestones that we've had today, have a look at that progress that we've made, and then take a look into what the future of that payment security could look like. Now, we've got a very big group here today. I think 758 people. Was it, Brenda? Wow. That's a lot of people. So it's very large, it's very diverse. There are people from outside the region as well. Some of you are long-term partners of Visa. Some may be new partners and friends. Some thinking about partnering with us in the future. So I wanted to just start by introducing a little bit about who we are and Visa in this region. And we're very proud to be a leader in payments in most of the markets in which we operate. In fact, we've got 26 offices in more than 40 markets across Asia Pacific. More than 900 financial institutions actually partner with us. There are 17 million merchant locations that accept Visa payments. And for the first time last year, we actually passed the 1 billion mark in Asia Pacific in the number of cards or mobile credentials that were issued in this region. So that's a lot of people with the capability to use a Visa card or a Visa credential. And also, we are a very big region for Visa. We generate $1.8 trillion US in payment volume. And that's around 1/4 of Visa's business globally, around the same size as the business for Visa Europe. But what's most important here is not that size of Visa, but what is the opportunity that we all share together. And that circle that you see on the far right at the top corner there is the total personal consumption expenditure that takes place in Asia Pacific. Of that total PCE, as we call it, today, electronic payments have only penetrated 45%. There is still a $6 trillion opportunity for all of us in this region in terms of converting cash, and in some countries and markets, check, to electronic payments. We're not even halfway there. We still have a long way to go. It's fantastic. So here we are in China, in Shanghai. And as I said earlier, everyone knows that China is such a significant market globally in terms of its size, in terms of its pace of innovation, in terms of its success in displacing cash. I mean, if you go outside and try to make a purchase anywhere around here without your mobile phone, you're going to have a lot of trouble. You're going to find it very difficult to use cash, and in many places very difficult to use a piece of plastic. Things in China have moved so quickly in such a short period of time. And we're going to hear a bit more about that for our next speaker, our Group General Manager for China, Shirley Yu. But the developments that we see here in China today are the developments that we can look forward to potentially what things may look like in the rest of the world. And that's actually why we chose Shanghai for this summit. We think that for payment professionals like ourselves, there's so much to learn. There's so much to see. So for those of you, and a lot of you are sort of around this part of the room, who haven't been to Shanghai or to China before, please do take some time to go out and have a look and experience and observe what's happening with payments around here. So that was a really long introduction, wasn't it? But the title of my session today, as you see in the program, is the fourth revolution in payments. But what I wanted to do at the very beginning was look at a little bit of history to put this payments revolution, as we call it, into context. And I want to start with what I call the fourth industrial revolution. And let me explain that a little bit. So the idea, or this concept of a fourth industrial revolution, has received a lot of attention lately because it actually promises to make very profound changes to the way that we live and the way that we work. What it suggests is that society has industrialized production through three fundamental shifts, and we're currently entering that fourth revolution. Now, the first was, as you can see on the far left there, 150 to 200 years ago, was driven by engineering, the invention of the steam engine. The second industrial revolution, 100 to 150 years ago, through electricity and mass production lines. And then the third revolution over the past 70 years through digital technology and innovation. But there on the far right, you can see the fourth revolution, which has already started, and that's marked by emerging technologies, robotics, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, connected devices, autonomous vehicles, things that are going to be very disruptive and that are already very disruptive all across the globe. So this fourth industrial revolution has actually already impacted public transportation, media, telecommunications, retail, insurance, healthcare, banking, finance, payments. It's had massive impact and is having massive impact all across the world. And this is only going to quicken, and the pace will speed up over time. So let's look now then, we've looked at that industrial revolution to give the context, and let's move to this fourth payments revolution, which is the subject of today. So first, we can tie this back to the Industrial Revolution. The first, in terms of our payments revolution, we had analog. That was 60 years ago. Visa's 60 last year, when we introduced that concept of a payment card, that first revolution. Then in the past 30 to 40 years, we moved to the second revolution. And that second revolution is where we increased electronification, and that led to the issuance of magnetic stripes and chip cards that had enabled real-time verification on payments. And then the third revolution, which has actually only taken place in a very short space of time over the past 5 or so years, has centered on the development of tokenization to make truly digital payments. But now, we're on the cusp, we're on the edge of what I call the fourth revolution. And just like the fourth industrial revolution, this one as well, this fourth revolution in payments, is going to be defined by quantum computing, artificial intelligence, IoT, and a lot of other dynamic technologies that are going to fundamentally transform the payment experience. So the question is, what are payments in this fourth revolution going to look like? Well, it's data. Data, 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 data. Data is going to fuel payment technologies in this fourth revolution. All of this is going to enhance, data is going to enhance the usability of payments for every participant. And as more data is used and leveraged, it creates more data, and the cycle continues and continues. There's going to be less emphasis on the actual transaction, and instead the emphasis is going to move to the moments of commerce that matter the most to consumers, whether it's hailing a ride in a taxi or a ride share, making a purchase online, just like that, splitting a bill with friends. And because we're now going to be better utilizing data, payments is going to move beyond the transaction and become automated, much more automated, interactive, and personalized. Payments are going to be embedded in everyday experiences across all channels and all devices. Let's now look at what I'd call the evolving nature of fraud and how that lines up with our payment revolutions. Because the evolution of payment security can also be mapped across these four major phases. So just as payments technology and experience have changed, so do the source of attacks that we see on our payment system. Now, in that first revolution, in the analog age, criminals actually, they stole mail, as some of us remember, stole mail to steal personal documents, to steal identities, and to open fraudulent accounts. In that second revolution, in the electronic age, they skimmed, and they still do skim, data from legitimate cards to create counterfeit versions of those cards. And what we've seen most recently in the past 5 to 10 years in this digital age is mass data breaches that have actually exposed this same kind of sensitive information that criminals used to go through the mail to skim, but now it's on a completely unprecedented scale, because the mass data breach enables criminals to monetize this data that they receive way more efficiently through digital channels. Because don't forget that criminals are just as smart, if not smarter, than we are. So as we all know, when we try to prevent payment breaches and payment fraud, they're one step ahead. It's also a growth industry. What criminal organizations are doing is employing advanced technologies and social engineering techniques to gain data. They send phishing emails, they do targeted cyber attacks. But let's now move over to that fourth payment revolution and the evolution of payment security, because it's clear that data is going to be both an asset, a positive, and a liability. A security liability, because when we use data correctly and ethically, we can have a full range of innovation. It's fantastic. But this is exactly the same data that criminals want to get their hands on. So there's two sides to what we call the data debate. the debate about data. It's the promise of data, but also the problem associated with that. So let's have a look now at the benefits. What the promise of big data? A couple of years ago, The Economist printed an article in 2017 that said data is the most valuable asset in the world. Well, I think we all know that. But that was the first time it actually came in print in an article in The Economist, in a magazine that large. But the number of businesses and governments that now utilize big data solutions has grown exponentially in recent years, as we all know. It's transformative for industry, for commerce. And back in 2015, so actually almost 5 years ago, the World Economic Forum made some specific predictions about the benefits of big data. So even if you look back at these, there's a little bit of history here. 5 years ago, these still hold true today. Firstly, big data brings new business opportunities. And big technology companies were amongst the first to see the benefits of this, the enormous potential of big data analytics, using data to better understand consumer behavior and tailor specific products to individuals. And we see examples of online retailers improving online shopping experiences all the time, search engines driven by machine learning. That's what I said earlier. More data creates more data, more artificial intelligence, more opportunity. Secondly, another benefit of big data, new careers and new opportunities. The more companies use big data, they need the right talent to understand it. Now, data science is actually a relatively new career field. Actually, until a couple of years ago, Visa had 0 employees that were focused on data science. Today, we have hundreds of employees in our company, hundreds of our colleagues focused on data science, full-time data scientists. Last year, they worked on nearly 300 projects. That's more than one project for every working day of the year. Health. So big data is not just about the business of business, it's also about hospitals, health professionals, sharing health data to create personalized solutions. This has led to better treatment for patients, more communication between doctors and specialists, detailed data that can be transferred so that everyone has the right information they need to help patients. Fighting poverty. Big data also plays a role in improving living conditions around the world. Governments, businesses, NGOs, not-for-profits can better allocate resources to places where people in poverty, people outside the formal financial system can benefit by having access to better education, health services, welfare services, financial services. And finally, of course, why we're here, security. Security always remains one of the top concerns for businesses and organizations. That's why we're here talking about it today. But big data can help preventing breaches from occurring, but if they do occur, it can also help to minimize the damage from those that actually still manage to happen. So if the value of data is so clear and the potential so immense, why are we still on the edge or the cusp of this data revolution? Why haven't things happened the way that everyone's predicting them to? What's holding up all of this? And I think there are 2 key reasons for why this is being held up. The first one is simply technical and money. Dollars, yuan, euros, whatever, money, financial reasons. Because most data in the world, the terabytes to the nth zero, exists in a very, very unstructured form. It's very unstructured, and actually to bring it together, it takes an immense effort to convert it into a format that's usable and a format that's actually shareable. And if we all treat that data as an asset, so apart from the technical difficulties, no one's actually how to figure out properly yet how to price that data to exchange it efficiently. Now, the second is arguably the most important reason, and that's the question of consumer trust. Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, they're the 5 most valuable companies in this world. And in fact, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft are now in a very, very exclusive club where they have a value or a market cap of over $1 trillion US. That's a very exclusive club to be in. But the fact that they're now in this exclusive club has prompted a lot of calls around the world for these technology giants to be broken up, to be made into smaller companies. And we've seen that in a lot of countries in the past, when we look to the US, when the Bell telephone system was broken up in the 1990s. But size alone isn't a crime. I'd say that the success of big techs means that we can still continue to enjoy the benefits that they provide. We don't want to live without a search engine. We don't want to live without same-day delivery. We don't want to live without a social media news feed or live stream movies. So there's the good and the bad of it. But what's going to happen, and we'll think about it now, last year in 2018, we're going to remember that very clearly because there were so many headlines around privacy and security. Facebook, Google, Amazon, they were all called out publicly, a lot of media, about privacy breaches. And it was also the year, last year, when many, many governments and regulators around the world became very serious about protecting consumer privacy. It's always been on the agenda, but it became a lot more serious. Now, interestingly, the Financial Times, the FT, called China a surprise leader in data privacy rules. And we should look here, right here in China, where we are today, for actually what the government's doing, because the government in China is building a framework around data privacy with rules for consent, personal data collection, personal data use, personal data sharing, and very importantly, user-requested deletion of data. And the great thing about it is the Chinese government has also been very firm on enforcement. Earlier this year, it announced it was actually evaluating over 1,000 apps that were scraping personal data, and how do they collect personal data, and was this personal data being collected in accordance with the way that it felt data should be collected. So every single data breach that occurs, every single thing that happens continually undermines trust in payments. Every regulation that follows a breach tries to repair that trust. There's a breach, then there's an attempt to repair, and then we go on through the cycle. So that's why it takes the entire industry. That's why it takes all of us to have that common vision to protect the trust. We need to create that environment that nurtures innovation and puts the consumer first. That's when we can realize the true benefit of electronic payments. Now, this is my favorite time to check who's been paying attention. I'm going to ask some people in the audience some questions. It's quiz time. What do these numbers, there's a gentleman right at the front here who's worried I'm going to ask him. What do these numbers represent? 3.3 billion. Does anybody know? Come on. 758 people don't know what 3.3 billion is. I'll tell you. If your data was not leaked last year, then you're very, very lucky. Because it was estimated that in 2018, the information of over 3 billion people on this planet was somehow compromised. Almost half the world's population had their information stolen last year. That means half the people in this room. Now, you might not even know it, but in somehow your information was compromised. Next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Aha! Exactly. It is one of the world's, believe it or not, most popular passwords. Who's ever used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? I'm going to admit it, I have. I've also added 7, 8 on the end. Static passwords and login credentials have been one of the most common ways for cyber criminals to have breached security infrastructure. And actually, it's individuals like us, well, like me, clearly, because all of you security professionals have never done this, but we're the weakest link in this chain. Okay, 1.75 trillion US dollars. Anyone? That is the estimated economic loss across Asia Pacific in our region due to cybersecurity breaches in 2017. Now, that number is quite incredible because it's almost the same as Visa's total payment volume that I talked about earlier across Asia Pacific of 1.8 trillion. Lastly, 7%. Now, if that 1.75 trillion didn't make you take notice, 7%, the potential economic loss of Asia's GDP from these attacks is 7%. These are staggering numbers. So whether it's from airline to big tech, hailing services, social media, every single industry has had its share of cybersecurity breaches last year. And what I've actually referred to is personal data, because this is not payment data, because in the connected world today, cyber criminals actually don't make the distinction between payment data or personal data. Every single piece of data is valuable. Everything has value. So what do we do? And all of these things going on, how on earth do we protect ourselves? So as we think about protecting the payments ecosystem against all of these threats that we're seeing from the fourth revolution, we must continue to consider all the core components. Now, everything, the core targets that we're focused on, the core components of this payments ecosystem, they all remain the same. Data, number one, data that's transferred between multiple parties across the system to facilitate the exchange of goods and services. Very simple. People, us, we use payment methods to make transactions safely, seamlessly across the world. And lastly, infrastructure. Whether it's data hardware or software that ensures secure communication of the exchange between the parties to facilitate these transactions, this is so important. And these are the places where criminals can actually exploit every single component for illicit gain. It's where we're vulnerable. So let's look at data first. By 2021, there are going to be 25 billion data endpoints. Your smartphone is a data endpoint. And the sum of all of these devices together generates data equivalent to 90 years' worth of high-definition video daily. We've got to make more progress at devaluing this data. But it creates bigger incentives for cyber criminals to use new technologies to break into that value chain. So whilst we've been able to contain the impact of a lot of data breaches by devaluing data through chip, tokenization, and encryption, the size of that data pool just keeps growing, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what we're going to see is as e-commerce and digital payments become more ubiquitous, those data breaches are just going to accelerate. The migration of fraud that continues to accelerate from the physical to the digital space. Then people. These are our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, us. So as data becomes more and more devalued, then the primary target for criminals moves to individuals, to all of us. Consumers, even employees of payment firms. Cybercrime organizations use information all scraped off social networking sites, and they do very highly targeted phishing attacks. Everyone has been subject to a phishing attack. Some of us can see it straight away. Others are very highly sophisticated, and these can devastate organizations when they target employees. So the most challenging attacks exploit human vulnerabilities rather than technical vulnerabilities. Technical vulnerabilities are very, very easy to remediate. Human vulnerabilities are not. Finally, infrastructure. Now, the payment infrastructure is rapidly expanding. Anybody can be a merchant. If you've got a mobile phone, you can be a merchant. You can be an acceptance point. And that becomes a potential target. So payment networks have used artificial intelligence for years to detect and prevent fraud. But criminals now use artificial intelligence to create malware to put in and target on all of those focused and customized attacks. It's becoming way, way more sophisticated, way more than just hacking. So what I wanted to do now is just go back to my earlier point about how data could actually be a solution to some of the fraud trends that we talked about. Because even despite all of that gloom and doom and all those negative things I just said, we are actually in a relatively good position today compared to where we were a number of years ago. See the little timeline that we have behind us. What does all that look like? This is my favorite part of the presentation. All these blue bars that come up. These represent basis points in fraud over time. So starting there on the far left, in the 1950s through to today, this is showing a very steadily downward trend in fraud rates over the years and through each of those payment revolutions that I mentioned earlier. In the 1950s, fraud rates were at their peak, at the very beginning of this in the analog days. So when we map, as you see along the chart, the introduction of payment security technologies and standards against a backdrop of falling fraud rates, you can see that every payment innovation is actually also really a payment security innovation. And in the past 25 years, Visa fraud rates have dropped by 2/3. That's a big impact. That's an achievement that we've made together. Now, let's look to the future. Now remember, as Joe said at the beginning, this is a forward-looking statement. But this is about thinking what the future could look like. And that's represented by these gold bars. So what we aspire and what we need to aspire as an industry is to leap to the next stage in payment security and reduce the fraud rates that we see today by half, again, by 2025. And the only way that we're going to do this is through collaboration and by continuing to protect, devalue, and harness data, as well as empower consumers. So our security strategy at Visa is very, very clear. Innovation, data, and technology are our best assets to create security solutions. So we've been using, at Visa, we already use actually our data to analyze over 500 different elements in every single transaction. And we help a financial institution decide whether to approve or decline those transactions. Last year, 2018, we processed more than 127 billion transactions between merchants and financial institutions. And we used artificial intelligence to analyze how many percent of them? 100%. Every single transaction was subject to an AI analysis, and we believe that prevented around $25 billion in fraud last year. So in this data-driven fourth payment revolution, this next generation of fraud management solutions is going to have a huge potential to dramatically improve detection rates and improving the customer experience. But we're still going to have to collaborate in order to achieve that. And we have to take a multi-layered approach in order to get to that outcome that we need. We have to constantly monitor the system. We have to share intelligence amongst our partners. So Visa has a very clear three-pronged security strategy. I'm sure a lot of you will have heard about this before. The first is empowering consumers. We have to empower the consumer. We have to provide them with the tools, the resources, the controls, so that others can help make informed risk decisions. But to provide these tools, we then have to invest in intelligence and technologies that improve fraud and authorization performance. But then when you do that, you actually have to make sure that everything scales globally, so we need an environment that fosters collaboration. Collaboration to secure the future of payments. All of these detailed pillars feed into our strategic vision that security is the core driver of payments innovation. It's a fundamental requirement for the future of payments. So, this is my crystal ball. Do you like that? It's the one I referred to earlier. We are on the cusp, we are on the edge right now of what we call this fourth payments revolution. It's a very, very exciting time for all of us to be working in the payments industry, to be looking at the future through that camera lens of a payments professional. As I said, it took more than 100 years for the world to move from the first to the second industrial revolution, another 100 years to get to the third, and then 60 years to get to the present day. And then by contrast of that huge 260-year period of time, it took just 60 years for payments to spin through that cycle of the first payment revolution to be right here on the edge of the fourth. There are some things on the basis of that we know for absolute certain. Number one, the future of payments is going to be very, very complex. There's no question about that at all. But also the challenges we face, the security challenges we face, are going to be what we call multifaceted. They're going to come from everywhere. They're going to present themselves in all different shapes and sizes. Innovation is coming from everywhere. It's coming at us from all quarters. So we must continue to advocate an open, standards-based approach to new innovation. And it's only then that we can be consistent in security, reliability, and interoperability. Security, reliability, interoperability. That is how we're going to get on this journey into the fourth payments revolution and beyond. Thank you.